The following video has endgame spoilers of several Sonic the Hedgehog games, most notably Shadow Generations. For those sensitive to them, there are some scenes with flashing lights. Please keep that in mind before watching. Sonic the Hedgehog games in 2024. It's a touchy subject, isn't it? Well, I have no reservations discussing the topic, especially considering it has been my favorite game series as far back as I can remember. I mean, yeah, the Blue Blur has had a wildly inconsistent track record over the last decade, which has left a confusion of identity all the more open to criticism. Though it is criticism that rarely appears the same way twice. With every new installment in this franchise, you're rolling the dice and taking a gamble because a unanimously praised entry is about as common as a max win on the slots. But I'd argue that this unpredictability has made the Sonic the Hedgehog games captivating in their own way. But I don't think there's been a victory quite as decisive as Sonic Generations, the 2011 high-speed platformer that showed Sega and Sonic Team diving deep into the Hedgehog's history to mine out the nostalgia buried within. Sonic Generations was a celebration of Sonic the Hedgehog, and a 100% targeted one. It managed to show some of the hero's most iconic moments from years prior, while also reinterpreting many classic sensibilities for a new, modern age. It paid homage to the most memorable bits of the hero's history, carefully considering how to present these bits under the contextual umbrella of Sonic in the 2010s. Dialogue was referential, but done in respect of the past games, rarely in self-deprecation. Levels used their iconic gimmicks in ways that neatly fit into the modern Sonic design, while still providing plenty of depth in how the player could progress through them. What could easily be labeled as fan service was actually a committed and disciplined design attitude that treated Sonic the Hedgehog as a treasure worth preserving. Through presentation and design alike, sincerity was the name of the game with Sonic Generations, resulting in not just a polished and fun game to play, but a spectacular way to honor the everlasting vibes of Sonic the Hedgehog. This was a nostalgia trip worth taking. So now, more than 10 years later, we're seeing another throwback installment, but this time our favorite Ultimate Life form is sharing the billing. Mirroring Generations' initiative with a character like Shadow seems sensible. He's not just a hit with fans, but also a character with one of the most detailed histories of all of Sonic's teammates, even outclassing some of the OG gang's representation in some ways. The fall of the Space Colony arc, the confrontation with Black Doom, Shadow's backstory has been complex and multifaceted, giving the anti-hero so many reasons to be as brooding as he turned out to be. But perhaps even more importantly, he's gone up against Sonic plenty of times, marking him as a more than competent rival, but also one that comfortably fits into this new style of Sonic gameplay. In fact, he's made his mark already, so like Sonic Generations did in 2011, Shadow Generations was Sega and Sonic Team's big opportunity to give Shadow's whole persona a magnified look. But under that magnification, something's different here, something I hopefully can explain to you all in this video. So let's try and figure this out. So, confession time, I never really got Shadow. It seems weird to say that because Shadow always seemed like a character that any angst-ridden teen living in the early 2000s would absolutely embrace. He didn't follow Sonic's lead, instead keeping pace with his rival through reserved but unpredictable motives. He found Sonic's uplifting heroism to be a thorn in his side, a lack of seriousness that eclipsed the comparatively no-nonsense agenda that he was meant to fulfill. In comparison to the Blue Blur, Shadow played by his own rules, and for many people who grew up back then, this was peak. This was the kind of character that you want to play as. And I think that's important to note. In Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow acted as the dark parallel to Sonic the Hedgehog. He was the other side of the coin, a way to transfer the high-speed action of a Sonic the Hedgehog title through a morally blurred lens. The entire dark story might not have been wildly unique conceptually, but there was something compelling with seeing that other side, while still balancing the design with its heroic counterpart. The planets aligned to deliver a character who could go toe-to-toe with Sonic, meeting him on the battlefield and matching the moves that defined him. So why was I so indifferent to Shadow? I already had been a huge fan of Sonic himself, but the more I think about it, that appreciation is likely what drove me to dismiss Shadow as simply Dark Sonic. Firstly, we already had Metal Sonic, who's been a worthy challenger and legitimate threat to Sonic as far back as 1993. He was a way to replicate Sonic's abilities under the cold, menacing vibe of Eggman's megalomania. Metal Sonic didn't just match Sonic in skills, but he also represented what the world would be if Sonic failed: emotionless, robotic, and totally lacking in humanity. So what does Shadow the Hedgehog represent? Well, he's a big part of Sonic Adventure 2's story for sure, acting as the familiar liaison toward Gerald and Maria Robotnik. After the tragedy aboard the Space Colony Ark, Shadow is hell-bent on revenge, letting his mission guide his dangerous actions. He's the reason that Eggman is able to use the Eclipse Cannon and get as close to world conquest as he does. He's the reason that Rouge is able to escape death on Prison Island during her infiltration mission. He's the reason that Sonic and the rest of the cast are able to reach the altar at the Ark's core. As the story rolls on, Shadow begins to see his mission unravel, realizing that revenge is not what Maria truly wanted for him, culminating in him fighting the final hazard alongside his rival Sonic and sacrificing himself to save everyone. So all these years later, when looking at Shadow's place in Sonic Adventure 2, I can clearly see that this story needed a character like Shadow to really work. The ultimate life form created by Gerald Robotnik, one whose lone connection to humanity is taken away from him, only to have that connection reformed through the kind and supportive actions of others. It's a fable that's worth examining from all these different angles. While Sonic lives with endless optimism and care for the world around him, Shadow had to learn that optimism. He had to realize through plenty of hardship that life is precious and well worth fighting for. He was Sonic's dark mirror image, very much like Metal Sonic. But as the series gradually entered its adolescence, Shadow offered a more complex parallel than Metal Sonic did. He stood on the borderline between heroism and villainy, totally embracing his anti-hero status, not just by playing by his own rules, but by following the complicated perspectives that come from both. This was something that the Sonic games of the past didn't approach with this clear of intent. And while there is a school of thought that this kind of character doesn't gel with the goofy cartoon antics of Sonic, I'd argue that this was a mindful decision. Shadow was this series stepping into uncharted territory. With fans from the Dreamcast and GameCube eras coming together in appreciation for Sonic Adventure 2 and its tragic anti-hero, it's not that surprising that we wouldn't see the last of Shadow the Hedgehog. His appearance in 2003's Sonic Heroes clearly showed that this character's story wasn't over, especially with its famed cutscene featuring dozens of Shadow duplicates in Eggman's base. It opened the door to Shadow's world, a world that many of us thought was over following Sonic Adventure 2, and one that Sega was totally ready to tease for the future. Shadow had become a mainstay in the Sonic universe, and though there is a worthwhile discussion about letting a character truly retire instead of extending their lifespan past the point of healthy viability, Sega clearly had a plan for Shadow. But that plan was not foolproof, as we all found out just a couple of years later. "2005's Shadow the Hedgehog has become one of the most important games that Shadow has ever appeared in. And that's not necessarily a good thing. It's an infamous example of misguided pseudo-maturity, from its firearms to its mild-as-hell swearing.
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald?
It's a repetitive treadmill of scavenger hunt mission objectives leading to 10 different endings, all of which are canonically wiped once the true ending is revealed. It's the last nail in the coffin for Shadow, a misstep so catastrophic that it's convinced many that the character simply isn't worth salvaging, even this long after. But I want to step back for a second and take a more charitable look at 2005's Shadow the Hedgehog, at least from a narrative perspective, because there are some admittedly unfulfilled ideas that are well worth praising. While I don't want to say it's a genuinely good game, it absolutely isn't, it ends up showing a lot of fascinating pieces to Shadow's character profile. Of the 10 regular endings that Shadow the Hedgehog experiences throughout his self-titled game, you start to see a strange mix of separated but carefully interpreted feelings that Shadow shares with the player right before the credits roll. In one ending, Shadow expresses remorse and responsibility for the events that occurred on the space colony Ark, along with Maria and the inhabitants' deaths. In another, he treats the Ark as a sanctuary, one that he defends with his life in an act of honor and tribute to those who lived on it. He can end up a one-dimensional cartoon villain or a stubborn rival to his Blue Blur counterpart, but there are many moments in Shadow the Hedgehog where Shadow's drive to understand who he is ends up being rich with texture and thoughtfulness. These endings don't overlap canonically, but they do overlap through Shadow's own perspective, and act as ways for the player to understand what the character could be thinking about as a result of his own complicated past. When given the chance to see how Shadow's story could end, the player receives a small thread of the tangled feelings that make Shadow who he is. Shadow the Hedgehog might have been a hive of unpolished gameplay and nightmarishly repetitive structure, but I don't believe the idea behind the game was doomed from the start. Sega and the devs very well could have made Shadow's story a linear one, a way to explain what exactly happened to the Hedgehog after the events of Sonic Adventure 2. But I actually praise them for taking Shadow's narrative in such a multifaceted direction. Shadow as a character doesn't have as simple a history as Sonic does. He's experienced so much more than his speedy blue rival, and those experiences are begging to be examined with precision. The game Shadow the Hedgehog is Sega experimenting with the role, giving a sense of forward-thinking curiosity to the timeline, and adding a ton of dimension to Shadow himself, well beyond the brooding anti-hero vibe that he's been connected with in the past. Despite these moments of introspection toward the character, 2005's Shadow the Hedgehog was a mark of shame on the Sonic series, and one that continues to be a source of ridicule to this day. Sonic 06 and Sonic Forces, for all of their own issues, did their parts to improve Shadow's image, but it still wasn't enough to fully dodge this aura of embarrassment that the series couldn't shake for years onward. Of course, Shadow wasn't the source of the series' growing pains, though he did seem to get more criticism than other characters did. Even through his stronger moments, Shadow struggled to be taken seriously. So now, decades after Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow is getting the spotlight once again. But this time around, he's got a campaign all his own. Shadow Generations might share the billing with Sonic's nostalgia-drenched Joyride, but there is a sense of dedication here that the original 2011 adventure just doesn't seem to embrace in the same fashion. Though both games are a way for Sonic Team to fully celebrate and honor their respective stars, Shadow has much more to prove here, a legacy that's far more challenging to redeem. But this fleeting glimpse into Shadow's past strives to meet the same discipline as Sonic's was more than 10 years ago, while also letting Shadow match his counterpart in pure high-speed action. Even after a pretty extensive recap on Shadow's history, it doesn't take long for Shadow Generations to kick into high gear. The opening level Space Colony Ark bursts onto the scene. Gun robots, anti-gravity panels, and more rail grinding than you can shake a Chaos Emerald at, Space Colony Ark throws a lot at the player, marking a totally festive implementation to the design goals that push Sonic Generations into such superb territory. The controls are propulsive, with the boost pushing the player in a particular direction most of the time, but as you might expect, the cinematically shifting camera and over-the-top presentation are at their best when rushing to the end instead of stopping to smell the flowers. While it may not reach the more flexible, free-form control of Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow Generations has those subtle little tweaks that add up to a clean and crisp game to play, especially when you catch that addictive, adrenaline-drenched vibe. In motion, there's nothing else matching it. There's one major mechanic that really stands out though, Chaos Control. It's become one of Shadow's defining abilities, one inseparable from his character. As far back as his debut title, Shadow's been warping around and freezing time like a champ, which has led to mixed results when it comes to gameplay implementation. But Shadow Generations gives Chaos Control a level of versatility well beyond the skip most of the level implementation that appeared back in Shadow 05. Shadow can collect energy for Chaos Control, filling a gauge at the bottom of the screen, and once filled, he can trigger Chaos Control to freeze time. Certain green glows scattered about the level can act as trigger points to skip parts of the stage, but activating Chaos Control is almost entirely up to the player. It doesn't just freeze objects in the level, but also the timer itself. So being strategic with when to use Chaos Control within the context of the specific stage is vital if you're after top time ranks. This extremely simple mechanic is one of the most useful techniques in the game, and through this lens, it's amazing how Shadow's signature move ends up pushing the series design forward so confidently. Chaos Control is a way for Shadow's influence to really shine, both within his character and the levels he dashes through. It's a total no-brainer. But as Shadow approaches the end of Space Colony Arc, the whole world starts unraveling, and Black Doom, under the guise of Doom's Eye, reappears. Yes, the big bad from Shadow the Hedgehog's title game is back, and thanks to some timeline manipulations a la the original Sonic Generations, he acts as the major antagonist of Shadow Generations. His growly Dr. Claw voice is as silly and overly dramatic as ever, though there is something threatening about how he can warp the stage to such a degree. The fragility of space-time gives a narrative justification to stages lacking in traditional continuity, a dizzying spectacle that might not affect gameplay too much, but it looks cool and lets the designers change up both aesthetics and structure without going too far off the deep end. It's definitely a worthwhile move to distort things in a confusing and unpredictable way, while still remaining cohesive to the game's narrative. Another major change from Sonic Generations appears shortly after Space Colony Arc concludes, the White Space Open Zone. While Sonic Generations level selection appeared in a simple 2D space, Shadow has the luxury of a fully 3D world to explore, very much like Sonic Frontiers. But while Sonic Frontiers islands were massive and expansive, Shadow Generations sticks to smaller, more condensed spaces, with densely populated collectibles and on-the-spot time and ring collection challenges. With museum memorabilia as rewards for the player's diligence and skill, the collectibles have plenty of value, encouraging the player to scour every nook and cranny for hidden items. For the sake of a more player-friendly design, Shadow Generations trims the fat and preserves the lean, giving the player plenty to discover, but without the fatigue that often comes with enormous empty worlds. Each major level can be accessed via the open zone white space, with each one representing a different era from Shadow's tenure in the series. There are admittedly very few main stages, but Shadow's less extensive back catalog doesn't limit the creativity implemented into each level. Truth be told, Sega and Sonic Team struck an extremely tuned balance here, one that benefits from use of multiple pathways and more expansive level geometry within each stage. It's very much like Sonic Generations, where the best, most interesting levels had those additional routes which could be accessed with fast deduction and well-timed moves, especially in the modern stages. Replayability has been a key appeal of the Sonic series as a whole. It's always been that way. But Shadow Generations levels are suspiciously more creative than what's been shown in many other recent outings. The structure of these levels is miles ahead of anything seen in Sonic Forces or even Sonic Frontiers cyberspace levels. They're very readable in their design, but encourage trimming down that time second by second, demanding the player get better with each rush to the goal ring. The creativity is enhanced by the Doom powers that Shadow learns over time. Whether it's sliding along surfaces as Doom Morph or shooting out projectiles to trigger traps with Doom's Spear, these various skills in Shadow's arsenal act less like trivial gimmicks and more as fully utilizable moves that gently mesh into the level design. Using a Doom Spear to quickly take out an enemy impeding your path is a natural extension of the slides, stomps, and homing attacks that have existed within the Sonic toolset for ages. They can feel like press this button at this time QuickTime events in some circumstances, but thanks to multi-tiered level design, they rarely reach that level of rigidity. The skills do seem like familiar moves though, and when set next to older games in the series, these seem like ways to take the vehicles and firearms of Shadow 05 and Sonic 06 and have them make sense within less serious aesthetic parameters. In some interpretations, that might be the devs still feeling kind of ashamed to revisit those mechanics in such a high-profile game, reskinning them out of embarrassment. Well, sort of. Regardless, the moves are easy to use and fun to master, with both the stages and hub world benefiting from mixing up traversal and exploration with them. Attacking flying enemies with Doom Spear to obtain treasures or bypassing an on-foot section with well-timed Doom Morph swings all come together nicely. Whether they're mere reskins or not, they broaden the moveset in tandem with the more interesting level design. Altogether, they're shockingly forward-thinking. Channeling the excitement of the levels is a handful of remixed boss fights. These encounters take bits and pieces from past games and add some notable spins on their established setups, tenuously walking the line between faithful and modernized. The Bio-Lizard, one of Shadow's most iconic bosses from Sonic Adventure 2, starts off tried and true to its original incarnation. But once it gets those giant pink bubble tendrils, it honestly gets a bit silly. It does lead to some more complex combat, and the final attack stylistically matches even Sonic Frontier's masterfully epic bosses, but I couldn't help but roll my eyes when seeing this giant lizard monster channel a giant energy blast with its arms, I guess? The same can be said of Metal Overlord, whose obnoxious "I am the king of all creation" monologue tends to drone, interrupting a fantastic, totally remixed boss fight against the original from Sonic Heroes. I do like these boss fights' design, as they do evolve the old fights mechanics with these new creative parameters, giving Chaos Control a lot of utility, especially if you're out to bypass the boss's attack phases to nab an S rank. They could very well be entirely new boss fights based on that initiative alone. Major props go to the Mephiles boss fight, which features the villain in a metaphysical prison after being removed from the Sonic timeline following the events of Sonic 06. The fight itself is still exceptionally paced and choreographed, with plenty of slick phase design and smart uses of Shadow's abilities, though it's the narrative parallels that ring the loudest. Mephiles' dialogue playing throughout his fight hits hard, as his desperate pleas to exist are kind of emotional. A character being forced to come to terms with their erasure from time, frantically trying to grab a lifeline out of limbo, no matter how thin. It's an unusually poignant topic that makes for a very interesting angle for revisiting the character. I'd imagine that Shadow's final words to Mephiles have a touch of melancholy when looking at it from the player's perspective.
There is no future for you. Ever.
Shadow sounds badass, but for someone who has played Sonic 06 and knows what exactly happened in that game, it feels like Mephiles is crying out for accommodation. This entire sequence is an open door to exploring an older character in a newly insightful and multidimensional way. It's a downright artistic moment for the game. Its meaning doesn't fade easily at all. Now, Shadow might have a strong presence as a character, but there is something missing from this interpretation. A pretty glaring hole that really shouldn't have been overlooked. I don't mean to assert myself and play armchair developer here, but this shouldn't have been a cutscene. Shadow's rivalry with Sonic is one of the most important pieces of his entire existence. Like, look at the box art for Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow's debut game. You know he's supposed to match Sonic and act as a worthy challenger for him in the 2000s and beyond, so seeing this rivalry represented as a cutscene and not a full-on playable battle stings a lot. I know that it's meant to follow the original Sonic Generations canon, where Sonic does defeat Shadow, but at the very least, a what-if workaround would have been a spectacular way to share Shadow's begrudging relationship with the Blue Blur. These guys have always been on comparable tiers of power, so cutting that corner, even for the sake of Shadow Generations' more contained story, seems like a big missed opportunity, one that does sour an otherwise clever tangent existing alongside Sonic's original generation story. Now, for everything I've said about Shadow Generations, most of which is quite positive, there's something that constantly looms over me when looking at this game. It's a very important issue though, one that I think will become clearer when looking at how both Shadow 05 and Shadow Generations conclude. At the end of Shadow the Hedgehog's last episode, as he initiates his final move against Devil Doom and the Black Comet, Shadow states that it's time to put the past behind him, ultimately deciding that his complicated history will not define his future actions. He's free from the baggage that's plagued him, no longer bound by whatever interpretation of the past has endured to guide his actions. It's not about revenge, honor, or any of that. It's about Shadow as he is now. On the other hand, the final moments of Shadow Generations, with Maria and Professor Gerald vanishing as the time anomaly corrects itself, are heartfelt to say the least. Shadow attempts to stay strong and look forward, but it's clear that this goodbye is a difficult one, as he's unable to fully conceal his tears while dashing back to assist with Sonic's own adventure. It's a very different vibe than the ending of Shadow 05, where Shadow tosses the picture of his family aside and looks toward the future with confidence. Each of these approaches has its own successes and failures, but the common link between them is that Shadow is moving forward. Whether with decisiveness or hesitance, he's forced to look ahead. He can't go back to the past. But based on what we're seeing this year, I can't say the same for Sega and Sonic Team. Shadow's recent spike in attention feels contradictory to the message of these two games' endings. In 2024, Sega's proclaimed Year of Shadow the Hedgehog, we're all looking back at Shadow's history through multiple forms of media. We're bombarded with these reminders of how cool Shadow's past is, and as a result, that past has become embedded into Shadow's identity. This entire campaign featuring Shadow is, in a way, an act of hypocrisy, and this obsession with his past has led to a discouraging future for the character. The clear message that these games are both saying is that we should not dwell on memories forever, that we have to keep pressing onward. So why can't Shadow the Hedgehog exist without the constant reminiscence? Why can't Sega look forward, like Shadow is driven to do? Do I think Shadow Generations is a good game? Absolutely. Between the layered level design and smart use of Shadow's Doom skills, each stage expresses depth that the series has struggled to find for a long time. Memorable set pieces are plentiful and captivating. The open zone of white space feels condensed, but so much more involved than Sonic Frontiers Islands did. And even the moments where Shadow Generations takes some less restrained creative liberties, they feel tasteful. And maybe the fact that Shadow Generations is a great game is enough. Maybe that's all we wanted from the series at this point. But this is a case where a game's very existence seems to trample on some of the messaging of its character. Though Shadow's stories have stated that he's to look forward, Sega and Sonic Team seem content with looking back and using the past to color this franchise's future. For what it's worth, I don't think this is because of Shadow himself. Really, I should be going after Sonic Generations for doing the exact same thing back in 2011, but instead, I praise the hell out of it for that very reason. Well, Sonic Generations might not have been Sega and Sonic Team's first attempt at a Sonic throwback, but I feel that era of the 2010s was where the decision to cater to past appeal really started to dominate this series' identity. From Sonic 4 and Generations to even Mania and Forces, Sega's been grabbing the classic nostalgia toward this series by the throat, and I don't foresee it stopping anytime soon. It's far too lucrative. Even a game like Sonic Frontiers, one whose world design was the most daring the series has seen in decades, still felt tied to the past in one way or another. Really, how much of Shadow Generations' success is dependent on returning to a past that its own protagonist is forced to leave behind? Did this need to be another Generations throwback to do what it does well? It's no secret to many of you that I truly love the Sonic the Hedgehog series. I have for a very long time, and I don't think that'll ever change. I've booted up Sonic 3 Air or Sonic Adventure 2 Battle more times than I can count, and Sonic Frontiers consumed me entirely back in 2022. I've continued to study this series through some of its strangest or most controversial endeavors, and I've made a strong effort to find the value in those less than revered installments. Hell, in this very video, I've defended Shadow the Hedgehog 2005, a cardinal sin for any Sonic-adjacent YouTuber. And while Shadow Generations is a very impressive game, is it impressive because it shines a spotlight on Shadow's past? Or is it impressive in spite of that? I think the answer to that question is clear. When looking at how much I appreciate these games, I didn't intend to end this critique on such a discouraging note. But Sonic the Hedgehog is a video game series whose developers and publishers simply don't have the drive to let the past go. They know that it's what works. Why give up on that formula? Really, we've seen so many games in this franchise play up how incredible Sonic's history was, and I think that near constant desire for fond reminiscence has stunted the series' shot at true growth. Sega and Sonic Team are good at keeping their eye on the past. Perhaps too good, though. I want to see this series loosen its grip on its own legacy, to stop the blatant pandering to the Green Hills and Space Colony arcs, and push itself toward a stronger, more surprising future. Only then will Shadow's goal come alive. Only then will he truly be able to let it all go. Shadow Generations is a very replayable high-speed platformer with a lot of depth in its level design. It has a hub worth perusing down to its smallest detail, and it's a story that sharply focuses on a key character with dramatic enthusiasm. But it brings up an important question that is well worth considering. Has Shadow the Hedgehog, or even Sega and Sonic Team, really put the past behind them? Hey everybody, this is Alex Postman's Merrick, following up with what is going to be the last video of 2024. I'd like to thank everybody for your patience. I know this year's output was slim, but I think that what was released this year I'm pretty damn happy with, and I'm hoping for a more productive 2025. I have a lot of ideas, a lot of things in the works, but I really do appreciate you sticking around, holding tight to this channel. It means a lot to me. So I'm hoping to improve a lot of other things outside of the channel core. But right now, I hope everyone has a happy new year. And we'll see all of you, hopefully, back watching the channel in 2025. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day.